The rifle barrel gleamed cold against the morning frost as Jeremiah Whitmore crested the final ridge, his breath forming white clouds in the thin mountain air. Below him sat the cabin, his cabin now, bought sight unseen from a desperate widow. In Denver, but smoke curled from its chimney like an accusation. Someone was inside. Tiz's horse, a weathered mare named Patience, snorted nervously as they descended the rocky path. The deed in his saddlebag crinkled with each step, legal proof of ownership that seemed suddenly meaningless in the face of that defiant wisp of smoke. 3 months of traveling from the wheat fields of Kansas had led to this moment. This promise of solitude in the Colorado Territory, where a man could forget the war that still haunted his dreams. But solitude, it appeared, would have to wait. The cabin door opened before he could dismount, and a young woman stepped onto the narrow porch. She wore a simple dress of faded blue calico, her auburn hair braided down her back in the practical manner of frontier women. Yet something in her bearing suggested anything but surrender. Her eyes, green as the pine needles that carpeted the forest floor, met his with a steadiness that made him pause mid-motion. "You'd be Jeremiah Whitmore," she said, her voice carrying the musical lilt of someone raised among these peaks. It wasn't a question. He swung down from Patience, keeping his rifle loose in his grip, but ready. Years of cavalry service had taught him to trust his instincts, and every instinct screamed that this woman was dangerous, not in the way of wildcats or rattlesnakes, but in the way of sudden avalanches that could bury a man before he knew the mountain had shifted. "I am, and you'd be trespassing on my property." He pulled the deed from his coat, the official seal of the territorial government dark against the parchment. "Bought and paid for, miss." She stepped closer, unafraid, and he caught the scent of wood smoke and wild honey in her hair. "Violet Merriweather," she said, extending a work-roughened hand. "And I reckon we need to talk." Her grip was firm, calloused, from honest labor, but there was something else, a tremor, barely perceptible, that spoke of secrets held too long. When she released his hand, she glanced toward the tree line where the aspens whispered their eternal gossip to the wind. "Father built this cabin," she continued, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Before he died, he made me promise something. Something about the man who had come to claim it." Her eyes found his again, searching. "Something about you, Mr. Whitmore." The mountain silence stretched between them, broken only by Patience's gentle nicker and the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. Jeremiah had come here to escape the ghosts of Gettysburg, to find peace among peaks that had never known cannon fire. Instead, he'd found a mystery wrapped in calico and promises, standing on his own front porch like she belonged there. What kind of promise? He asked, though part of him already knew he didn't want to hear the answer. Violet's smile was sad and knowing, the kind that belonged to women who'd learned too young that life rarely offered simple choices. The kind that changes everything, Mr. Whitmore. The kind that means this cabin was never really meant to be yours alone. The interior of the cabin told stories Jeremiah wasn't prepared to read. Hand-carved furniture bore the marks of a craftsman's love, each piece fitted together with a precision that spoke of long winter evenings and patient hands. But it was the details that stopped him cold. A chess set arranged mid-game on a small table by the window. A military-issue mess kit cleaned and stacked beside the hearth. And hanging above the mantelpiece, a photograph of a man in Union blue, whose eyes held the same thousand-yard stare Jeremiah saw in his own mirror. "Captain Ezra Merriweather," Violet said, following his gaze. "Company K, 2nd Colorado Infantry. He served under Colonel Chivington before." She paused, her fingers tracing the edge of the wooden table. "Before Sand Creek changed him." Jeremiah set down his rifle and removed his hat, suddenly understanding. Sand Creek, the massacre that had stained the regiment's honor and driven good men to madness. He'd heard whispers of it in Denver saloons, seen the haunted looks of survivors who couldn't speak of what they'd witnessed. He knew you were coming, Violet continued, moving to the chess set and adjusting a knight's position. Not your name, not exactly when, but he knew. Said a man would come seeking what he'd sought, peace from war's ghosts. Said when that man arrived, I was to give him something. She reached into a wooden box beside the hearth and withdrew a letter, its edges worn soft from handling. The paper bore the official letterhead of the territorial governor's office, but the writing below was in a woman's careful script. This came 3 days after Papa died, she said, holding the letter like it contained live ammunition. From a Mrs. Adelaide Whitmore of Lawrence, Kansas. Looking for her son who'd gone west to heal from the war. The name hit him like a rifle, but to the chest. Adelaide's mother, who'd written him countless letters he'd never answered, who'd pleaded with him to come home to the burned remains of Lawrence, the town where Quantrill's raiders had taught him that some wounds never healed, where his childhood sweetheart had married his best friend while he was fighting rebels in Virginia. She's been writing to every territory office, every land agent, trying to trace where you'd gone. Violet's voice was gentle now, understanding. Papa made me promise that when you came, I'd help you understand something he learned too late, which is, Jeremiah's throat felt dry as summer dust, that running from ghosts only feeds them, that some battles can't be won alone. She set the letter on the table between them. Papa tried isolation, tried drinking, tried everything except the one thing that might have saved him. Through the cabin's single window, Jeremiah watched snow beginning to fall. Fat flakes that would soon make the mountain passes impassable until spring. He'd planned to winter here alone, to let the silence work its healing magic on his fractured soul. Instead, he'd found a woman with secrets and a dead man's chess game, both more dangerous to his carefully constructed solitude than any enemy he'd faced in battle. What did your father want you to tell me? He asked, though part of him already knew. Violet moved to the window, her reflection ghost-like in the gathering dusk. That healing starts when you stop running. That some promises are meant to be kept together. She turned back to him, and in the lamplight, her eyes held depths he was afraid to explore. He made me promise to stay until spring, to make sure you understood you didn't have to carry your burdens alone. The implications hung in the air between them like morning mist over a lake. A winter together in isolation, two strangers bound by the promises of the dead and the weight of their separate wars. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters with a kind of howl that reminded men how small they were against the mountain's indifference. And if I don't want company? He asked. Her smile was sad but determined. Then I reckon you'll have to throw me out into a blizzard, Mr. Whitmore, and something tells me you're not that kind of man. The storm arrived with the fury of a cavalry charge, transforming the mountain into a white wilderness that made leaving impossible and staying inevitable. For 3 days, Jeremiah and Violet moved around each other in the cabin's confines, like dancers learning an intricate waltz, each step measured and careful. He took the sleeping alcove near the door. She claimed the small room that had been her father's. Between them stretched the main living area with its stone hearth and the ever-present chess set, pieces frozen in Ezra Merriweather's final game. Neither touched the board, as if disturbing it might break whatever spell kept the cabin warm against the mountain's wrath. On the 4th morning, Jeremiah woke to the sound of splitting wood and found Violet outside, wielding an axe with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd been fending for herself long before his arrival. Her breath puffed white in the crystalline air as she worked, her movements economical and sure. Should have asked, he said, pulling on his coat and boots. That's man's work. She paused mid-swing, fixing him with a look that could have frozen. The Platte River. According to who? I've been splitting my own wood since I was 12, Mr. Whitmore. Don't plan to stop now just because there's a man around. The rebuke stung, partly because it was deserved and partly because something in her tone reminded him of his sister back in Kansas, the sister who died of typhoid fever while he was playing soldier. He took up the second axe from the woodpile and began working beside her, their combined rhythm creating a percussion against the mountain silence. "Tell me about before," she said, after an hour's companionable labor. "Before the war made you run." He considered deflecting, offering one of the half-truths he'd perfected over months of travel. Instead, something in the thin air and her steady presence made honesty seem possible. "I was going to be a teacher," he said, sinking his blade deep into a knot of pine. "Had it all planned to marry my childhood sweetheart, build a school in Lawrence, raise children who'd never know what it meant to duck when they heard hoofbeats." He split the log with more force than necessary. Then Quantrill came, burned half the town, killed my father. When I came back from the war, everything I'd planned was ash. Violet set down her axe and brushed bark from her palms. And the girl married my best friend 6 months after I enlisted. Can't blame her, she thought I was dead, and Thomas was a good man. Better than me, probably. The admission tasted bitter as mountain pine sap. When I got back, seeing them together with their baby, it felt like dying all over again. "So you ran." "So I ran." He met her eyes across the woodpile. "What about you? Why haven't you married? Pretty girl like you, there must have been suitors." A shadow crossed her face like clouds over the sun. "There was someone, a mining engineer from Denver, came up here surveying for silver claims. Gentle hands, kind eyes, talked about taking me to San Francisco." She began stacking the split wood with methodical precision. "Found out he already had a wife in California. 2 children. I was just ... convenient for his mountain sojourns. I'm sorry, don't be. Better to learn a man's truth before you give him everything than after." She dusted snow from her mittens. "Papa always said the mountain teaches you what people really are. Strip away the pretty words and soft promises, and you see whether someone's built to last or just built to look good." They worked in comfortable silence after that. 2 damaged souls finding temporary shelter in shared labor and honest words. As the sun reached its zenith, casting their shadows long across the snow, Jeremiah found himself studying Violet's profile against the white-capped peaks. There was something magnificent about her, not in the delicate way of drawing-room ladies, but in the way of the mountains themselves, beautiful, enduring, and absolutely uncompromising. That evening, as they sat by the fire sharing a simple meal of venison, stew, and cornbread, she finally approached the chess set. He was losing, she said, studying the board. Papa always played white, always played against some invisible opponent. This was his last game. "You play?" Jeremiah asked. "He taught me," said a woman who could think 3 moves ahead would never be caught off guard by life. She looked up at him, and something passed between them, not quite invitation, not quite challenge. "Care to finish what he started?" Jeremiah moved to the opposite chair, studying the board's battlefield. Black was indeed winning, but white still had options, still had fight left. Rather like life, he supposed. "Fair warning," he said, moving a pawn. "I played with my colonel during the war. He said I had a devious mind." Violet's laugh was like water over stones. "Mr. Whitmore, I'm a mountain girl who's been alone with my thoughts for 2 years. Devious doesn't begin to cover what I can do." 2 weeks passed like pages in a well-loved book, each day revealing new chapters in their careful dance of companionship. The chess games became nightly rituals, battles of wit that often lasted until the fire burned low and the mountain wind sang its ancient lullabies. Violet proved as formidable an opponent as she'd promised. Her mind sharp as winter starlight. But it was the small moments that began to matter most, the way she hummed while preparing meals. Melodies that seemed drawn from the mountain itself. How she tended the fire with an almost mystical understanding of flame and draft. The careful way she mended his torn shirt without being asked, her needle moving in tiny, perfect stitches that spoke of patience learned in solitude. Jeremiah found himself watching her more than was proper, cataloging the way morning light caught the copper in her hair. How her hands moved with unconscious grace, whether she was kneading bread or adjusting lamp wicks. He told himself it was merely appreciation for her competence. But his heart knew better. The revelation came during a storm so fierce it seemed the mountain itself was trying to shake them loose from its flanks. Thunder crashed overhead while lightning illuminated the cabin's windows in stark, electric moments. Violet sat at the chessboard, her brow furrowed in concentration, when a particularly vicious crash made her startle. "I hate storms," she confessed, her voice smaller than he'd ever heard it. "Papa used to say they were just the mountain's way of clearing the air, but they remind me of ... She trailed off, moving her queen with trembling fingers. "Of what?" "The night he died." The words came out in a rush, as if saying them quickly might lessen their power. It was storming, just like this. He'd been having nightmares again, talking to people who weren't there. I found him at dawn, sitting right here, staring at this chessboard like it held all the answers in the world. Jeremiah reached across the table and covered her hand with his. The touch was electric, sending warmth up his arm like lightning. Finding ground? What did he say? That the game wasn't finished. That someone was coming who needed to understand the difference between running away and strategic retreat. Her fingers intertwined with his, anchoring them both. He made me promise to wait, to help whoever came to understand what he never could. Which was? That some battles are worth fighting, even when you're scared. That surrender isn't always defeat. She lifted their joined hands and pressed them against her cheek. He was talking about more than chess, Mr. Whitmore. He was talking about living. The storm raged outside, but inside the cabin, something fundamental shifted. The careful distance they'd maintained, the polite boundaries of two strangers sharing. Space crumbled like spring ice. Jeremiah found himself studying the curve of her throat, the way her pulse fluttered beneath skin that seemed to glow in the lamplight. "Violet," he said, her name, a prayer, and a question. "I know," she whispered. "I feel it too. Half since that first morning when you rode down the mountain like some avenging angel." Her laugh was shaky. "Papa said the mountain would send me what I needed, not what I wanted." I thought he was talking about protection, about someone too. Help me through the winter. And now I think he was talking about completion. About finding the other half of a conversation I didn't know I was having. She turned her face into his palm, and he felt the butterfly touch of her lips against his skin. "But you're still running, Jeremiah Whitmore, still fighting ghosts that exist more in your mind than in the world." The truth of her words cut deep, but not cruelly. Like a surgeon's blade, they exposed the infected wound he'd been carrying. "I don't know how to stop." "Then let me show you." She rose from her chair and moved around the table, settling beside him on the worn wooden floor. "Let me show you what my father learned to light that healing begins with letting someone else carry part of the load." Outside, the storm howled with renewed fury, but Jeremiah barely heard it. All his attention focused on the woman beside him, on the way her hand felt in his, on the impossible gift of her presence. For the first time since Lawrence burned, since his world collapsed into ash and regret, he felt something other than the cold weight of the past. He felt hope. "What are you offering, Violet Merriweather?" "Ha," he asked, though his heart already knew the answer. Everything, she said simply. A home, a partner, a chance to build something new from the pieces of what we lost. Her smile was radiant as spring. Sunrise, I'm offering to finish this game together. Morning brought clarity, sharp as mountain air and twice as intoxicating. Jeremiah woke to find Violet already up, standing at the window with a cup of coffee steaming in her hands, watching the sun paint the snow-covered peaks in shades of rose and gold. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world so pristine it seemed newly made. The pass will be clear by afternoon, she said, without turning. If you want to leave, today would be the day. He joined her at the window, accepting the coffee cup she offered. Their fingers brushed in the exchange, and he felt that same electric current he'd discovered the night before. Is that what you think I should do? I think you should do what your heart tells you, not what your fear demands. She faced him then, and in the morning light her eyes held depths he was only beginning to explore. But I also think you should. Know what you'd be leaving behind? Before he could ask what she meant, she led him outside to a small outbuilding he'd assumed was a storage shed. Inside, illuminated by shafts of sunlight through gaps in the logs, he found a workshop that spoke of dreams deferred but never abandoned. Hand tools hung in perfect order along the walls, and half-finished furniture pieces sat covered in canvas, waiting for spring to bring their creator back. Papa was building a school, Violet said, running her hand along a partially completed desk. Said the mountain children deserved better than growing up wild, never learning their letters or ciphering. He had plans to bring a teacher up from Denver, but then the war came and changed everything. Jeremiah lifted one of the canvas covers, revealing a beautifully crafted chair sized for a child. The workmanship was exquisite, each joint fitted with the precision of someone who understood that furniture, like trust, was built to last generations. He never forgot you wanted to be a teacher, Violet continued. Somehow, he knew that's what brought you here, not just running from the past, but searching for a way to make the future mean something. The implications took his breath away. This isolated cabin wasn't just retreat, it was preparation. A man's last gift to the son he'd never met. Preparation for a purpose neither of them had dared to hope for. There are 12 families scattered through these mountains, Violet said, settling on a saw bench like it was a throne. Miners, hunters, a few trying to scratch farms from the high meadows. Their children are growing up without letters, without ciphering, without any knowledge of the world beyond these peaks. You're asking me to stay, he said, though it wasn't really a question. I'm asking you to live. She stood and moved to a window that looked out over the valley below, where smoke from distant chimneys marked the presence of those scattered families. Papa said running was just another kind of deaths, slower than a bullet, but just as final. Said the only way to honor the dead was to build something worthy of their sacrifice. Jeremiah moved to stand behind her, close enough to smell the wood smoke in her hair, to feel the warmth radiating from her skin. And what about us? What about this thing growing between us? That's not separate from the school, Jeremiah. That's part of it. She leaned back against his chest, and he felt the rightness of it in his bones. Papa made me promise to wait for the teacher, but he also made me promise something else. He made me promise to love without fear, to give my heart completely when the right man came. His arms encircled her waist of their own accord, holding her against him like she was the answer to every prayer he'd never dared utter. How can you be sure I'm that man? Because you haven't left yet, she said simply. Because when I offered you everything last night, you didn't take advantage. Because you look at these mountains the way I do like, they're not just beautiful, but sacred. They stood together in the morning silence, watching eagles circle the peaks and feeling the weight of possibility settle around them like new snow. Finally, Violet turned in his arms and looked up at him with eyes that held no doubt, no reservation. "Marry me, Jeremiah Whitmore," she said. The words clear and strong as church bells. Help me build this school. Help me keep the promise I made to a dying man. Help me prove that love doesn't always end in ash and regret. The proposal should have terrified him. 3 weeks ago, he'd been running from exactly this kind of connection, this kind of responsibility. But standing in that workshop surrounded by the dreams of a dead man and the hopes of a living woman, he felt only peace. Yes, he said, and sealed the promise with a kiss that tasted like coffee and possibility and the wild honey of mountain. Flowers, yes, to all of it. Spring arrived like a shy bride, tentative and beautiful, transforming the mountain landscape from austere white to vibrant green almost overnight. With the melting snow came visitors first, a lone trapper checking trap lines, then a family of homesteaders seeking supplies, and finally a delegation of mountain folk who'd heard rumors of the teacher and his bride to be. Jeremiah and Violet had spent the winter months planning their evening chess games, replaced by discussions of curriculum and construction. The workshop became their shared sanctuary, where they refined Ezra's plans and added their own innovations. Jeremiah's military experience proved invaluable in organizing logistics, while Violet's intimate knowledge of the mountain families helped them understand exactly what kind of education would take root in this harsh but beautiful soil. "Ain't much to look at, I reckon," said Samuel Garrett, a weathered man whose calloused hands spoke of years wrestling or from reluctant mountainsides. He'd arrived that morning with his wife Martha and their 3 children, drawn by word that someone might finally teach their young ones proper schooling. "Looks just right to me," Jeremiah replied, gesturing toward the partially constructed schoolhouse. The building was simple but solid, designed to withstand mountain weather while providing space for 20 pupils of varying ages. Should be finished by September if the weather holds. Martha Garrett stepped forward, her work-worn face brightening with hope. "And you'll really teach them reading and writing. Proper mathematics. Reading, writing, arithmetic, geography, and natural philosophy," Violet confirmed. "My husband believes children should understand the wider world, even if they choose to make their lives in the mountains." The casual way she said, "My husband," sent warmth through Jeremiah's chest. They'd been married 3 weeks ago by Circuit Judge Peterson during his spring rounds, a simple ceremony witnessed by a handful of mountain families and blessed by sunset light through the cabin windows. No church bells or white dress, but the vows had been no less binding for their simplicity. "What about the cost?" asked young Tom Garrett, barely 16, but already bearing the responsibility of his family's mining claims. "Schooling costs money, and money's scarce up here." Jeremiah and Violet exchanged a look. They'd discussed this question during countless evening conversations, knowing it would be the make-or-break issue for most families. "No cost," Jeremiah said. "The mountain provides for those who respect it. We'll ask for help with construction, with supplies when families can spare them, but no child will be turned away for lack of coin." "How you gonna live then?" Martha asked practically. "Same way you do," Violet replied. "We'll hunt, fish, keep a garden, preserve what we can for winter. The mountain teaches you what you need, not what you want." Samuel stroked his grizzled beard thoughtfully. "That's Ezra Meriwether talk. He used to say things like that." "My father," Violet said simply. "He dreamed of this school. We're just making his dream reality." As if summoned by mention of Ezra's name, more families began appearing throughout the day. The Hendersons from the High Meadow, the O'Briens from the Eastern Slope, even the reclusive Polson family from the remote Northern Valley. Word had spread through the mountain community with the efficiency of wildfire, carrying news of the teacher and his bride, of the school that would finally give their children a chance at more than survival. By evening, nearly 40 adults and twice as many children had gathered around the cabin, creating an impromptu celebration that reminded Jeremiah of barn raisings in Kansas. Someone produced a fiddle, another contributed a jug of corn, whiskey, and soon The mountain air rang with music and laughter. "Look what you've done," Violet murmured, slipping her arm through his as they watched children chase fireflies while their parents shared stories and dreams around the fire. "What we've done," he corrected. "I couldn't have built this without you." "Papa would be so proud," she said, and her voice caught slightly. He always believed community was the antidote to isolation, that bringing people together was how you healed from hurt. As if to prove her point, old Henrik Paulsona man, legendary for his misanthropy, approached them with something like shyness in his weathered features. "Heard you might teach reading to adults too," he said, his accent thick with the rhythms of his Norwegian homeland. "Been thinking it's time I learned to write letters to my brother in Minnesota. Been too proud to ask before." "Of course," Jeremiah said immediately. "Evening classes, when the day's work is done. Reading, writing, whatever folks need." Henrik nodded gruffly and moved away, but not before Jeremiah caught the moisture in the old man's eyes. It was a reminder that everyone carried losses. Everyone had dreams deferred by circumstances beyond their control. Late that night, after the last visitor had departed and the mountain had returned to its ancient silence, Jeremiah and Violet sat on their porch watching stars emerge in the crystal-clear sky. "Are you happy?" she asked, her head resting against his shoulder. "I didn't think I remembered how to be happy," he admitted. "But this us, the school, the community we're building, it feels like coming back to life. The dead don't get second chances," she said softly, "but the living do. Papa taught me that, even if he couldn't follow his own advice." Jeremiah kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her hair and the wild freedom of mountain air. "Thank you for what? For waiting, for believing. For showing me that some promises are worth keeping, even when they're hard." Above them, the Milky Way sprawled across the sky like spilled cream, and somewhere in the forest an owl called to its mate. The mountain held them in its ancient embrace, and for the first time since the war, Jeremiah Whitmore felt truly at peace. The school opened on the first Monday of September, 1887, with 17 students ranging in age from 5 to 15. Jeremiah stood before them in the morning light streaming through windows he'd installed himself, looking out at faces bright with curiosity and the particular alertness of mountain children. Young people who'd learned early that survival required attention to detail and quick thinking. "Good morning, students," he said, his voice carrying the authority he'd once used to address cavalry units. "My name is Mr. Whitmore, and this is Mrs. Whitmore. We're here because we believe every one of you has something important to contribute to this world." Violet sat at a smaller desk to one side, ready to help with the youngest children while Jeremiah handled the more advanced students. They'd spent weeks planning this moment, organizing materials and preparing lessons that would be both practical and inspiring for children whose lives were shaped by mountain realities. "Now," Jeremiah continued, picking up a piece of chalk, "who can tell me what this word says?" I wrote dream on the slateboard in large, clear letters. A hand shot up from the middle of the room. Jenny O'Brien, 12 years old, with her mother's red hair and her father's stubborn chin. "Dream," she said confidently. "Very good, Jenny. And can anyone tell me what a dream is?" This time it was little Sarah Henderson, barely 6, who answered in a voice like silver bells. "It's what you see when you're sleeping." "That's one kind of dream," Jeremiah agreed, smiling. "But there's another kind. Anyone know what that might be?" Tom Garrett raised his hand. "Something you want real bad. Something you hope might happen someday." "Exactly." Jeremiah turned back to the board and wrote goals beside dreams. Dreams are what we hope for. Goals are how we make dreams come true. And that's what this school is about, helping you turn your dreams into goals and your goals into reality. The morning progressed with a rhythm Jeremiah remembered from his brief teaching experience before the war. Alphabet recognition for the youngest, basic arithmetic for the middle group, and geography for the older students. But it was during the afternoon's natural philosophy lesson that the real magic happened. "Mrs. Whitmore is going to show you something special," Jeremiah announced, gesturing for Violet to join him at the front of the classroom. She carried a glass jar filled with clear mountain water and what appeared to be a small piece of quartz crystal. The children leaned forward, intrigued. "This crystal," Violet said, holding it up to catch the light, "came from the same mountain where you all live. But watch what happens when we put it in water and shine light through it." She lowered the crystal into the jar and positioned it near the window. Immediately, tiny rainbows danced across the classroom walls, drawing gasps of wonder from the children. "The light was always there," she explained. "But the crystal showed us something we couldn't see before, that white light is actually made of many colors, all mixed together. Sometimes learning is like that. Things that seem simple turn out to be wonderfully complicated when you know how to look at them properly." Henrik Poulsen's grandson, a serious boy named Eric, raised his hand. "Does that mean there are hidden things everywhere?" "Everywhere," Jeremiah confirmed. "In rocks, in plants, in the way water flows down a mountainside, even in the way numbers work together. The more you learn, the more wonders you discover." As autumn progressed into winter, the school became the heart of the mountain community. Evening classes drew adults hungry for knowledge they'd never had the chance to acquire. Henrik Poulsen laboriously penned letters to his brother, his weathered face creased in concentration. Martha Garrett learned to keep proper accounts for the family's mining operation. Samuel discovered a talent for poetry that astonished everyone, including himself. But it was during the Christmas program that the true measure of their success became clear. The schoolhouse was packed with every family within a day's travel. Parents and grandparents crowding onto benches to watch their children perform. Jenny O'Brien recited a poem about mountain seasons, her clear voice carrying to every corner of a corner of the room. The Henderson boys demonstrated geometric principles using wooden shapes they'd carved themselves. Little Sarah sang a song Violet had taught her about the water cycle, complete with gestures that had the audience clapping along. But the moment that brought tears to Jeremiah's eyes came when Eric Poulsen stepped forward with a carefully prepared speech. "Before Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore came," he said, his young voice steady and clear, "I thought books were just for rich people in cities. I thought learning was something that happened to other folks, not mountain people like us." He paused, looking out at the crowd of weathered faces, at parents who'd worked their hands raw to build better lives for their children. "But now I know different. Now I know that learning isn't about where you come from or how much money your family has. It's about being curious, about asking questions, about wanting to understand how things work." He pulled a small, hand-bound book from behind his back. "I wrote this book about our mountain app, but the plants and animals and rocks and seasons. Mr. Whitmore helped me with the big words, but all the ideas are mine. And someday, I'm going to write more books, maybe even become a real scientist." The applause that followed was thunderous, and in that moment, Jeremiah understood something profound. This wasn't just about teaching children to read and write. This was about showing an entire community that they were capable of greatness. That geography didn't determine destiny. That dreams could take root and flourish even in the thinnest mountain air. Later that evening, as he and Violet cleaned up the schoolhouse by lamplight, she found him standing quietly by the window, looking out at the snow-covered peaks. "Regrets?" she asked softly. "The opposite," he said, pulling her close. "I was just thinking about your father's promise, about what he saw that I couldn't see." "What was that?" "That running away and moving toward something aren't the same thing. I thought I was just escaping when I came here." But he knew somehow, he knew I was really searching. Searching for this? He gestured around the classroom at the children's work covering the walls, at the evidence of dreams taking shape. Searching. For you? She kissed him then, soft and sure, and in that kiss he tasted the salt of happy tears and the sweetness of a future neither of them had dared to imagine. By the spring of 1888, the mountain school had gained a reputation that reached all the way to Denver. Territorial officials began making the difficult journey to observe what they'd heard described as an educational miracle in the wilderness. What they found exceeded even their most optimistic expectations. Inspector General William Hartwell arrived on a gray April morning, expecting to find a rustic log building with minimal resources and children receiving basic literacy instruction. Instead, he discovered students conducting geological surveys of local mineral deposits, maintaining detailed weather records that rivaled those of professional meteorological stations, and engaging in philosophical discussions that would have impressed university professors. "How is this possible?" he asked Jeremiah during a private conference in the cabin that evening. "These children, some of them, couldn't write their own names 18 months ago. Yet today, I watch them debate the principles of representative government with sophistication that shames many adults." Jeremiah poured coffee from the pot Violet kept perpetually warm and considered his answer carefully. "We don't teach subjects, Inspector. We teach thinking. When a child understands that mathematics describes the natural world, that history explains the present moment, that literature explores the human heart, learning becomes inevitable. And the families support this approach." "The families demand it," Violet interjected, joining them with a plate of fresh-baked biscuits. "They've seen what education can do." Samuel Garrett's oldest boy, Marcus, received a scholarship to the Colorado School of Mines based on his geological essays. The Henderson girl, Anna, has been corresponding with botanists at Harvard about high-altitude plant adaptations. When parents see their children's minds awakening, they become fierce protectors of that awakening. Inspector Hartwell shook his head in amazement. "I came here prepared to offer territorial funding for supplies and perhaps a small salary for Mr. Whitmore. Instead, I find myself wondering if we should be sending teachers from Denver up here to learn your methods." The offer of financial support was tempting. Winters were hard, and resources remained scarce, but Jeremiah and Violet had discussed this possibility during long evenings by the fire. "We appreciate the gesture," Jeremiah said carefully, "but we've learned that the mountain teaches different lessons than the city. Our students need to understand both worlds, but they need to do so from a foundation of who they are and where they come from." What he didn't say, but what Violet understood perfectly, was that accepting territorial control would mean accepting territorial limitations. The school's strength lay in its independence, its ability to respond to the specific needs of mountain children rather than bureaucratic requirements designed for urban populations. After Inspector Hartwell departed with promises to submit glowing reports to the territorial legislature, life settled back into the rhythms that had sustained them through 2 challenging but rewarding years. The school enrollment had grown to 23 students, requiring the construction of an additional room and the recruitment of Bethany Carlisle, a young woman from Boulder whose own unconventional education made her perfectly suited to their approach. But it was during the early summer of 1888 that Jeremiah and Violet received news that would test everything they'd built together. The letter arrived with the weekly mail delivery, bearing the familiar handwriting that made Jeremiah's heart constrict with old grief. His mother, Adelaide, writing from Lawrence with news that his childhood friend Thomas had died in a farming accident, leaving behind his widow Jeremiah's former sweetheart, Constance, and their 3 young children. "She's asking you to come home," Violet said quietly, having read the letter over his shoulder. "She's asking you to do the honorable thing." "The honorable thing?" The phrase carried weight that threatened to crush the happiness they'd so carefully constructed. Constance had once been everything to him: his first love, his planned future, the dream that war had stolen. She was alone now, struggling to maintain a farm and raise children in a town that still bore scars from Quantrill's raid. "What are you thinking?" Violet asked, though her voice remained steady. Jeremiah stared out at the mountains that had become home, at the school where children's laughter drifted through open windows, at the community that had embraced him as family. "I'm thinking that 18 months ago I would have seen this as divine judgment, proof that I didn't deserve happiness, that the past always catches up with you. And now? Now I'm thinking about promises." He turned to face her, seeing his own struggle reflected in her green eyes. "I made promises to you, to this community, to those children. But I also have obligations to people who needed me long before I came to these mountains." The silence stretched between them like a chasm, filled with all the things they couldn't say. Finally, Violet spoke in a voice that carried echoes of the strength that had first drawn him to her. "Then we need to find a way to honor both," she said simply. "Because running away isn't who you are anymore, Jeremiah Whitmore, and breaking promises isn't who I married."